They always tell you to avoid the last train. That's when things happen, people say with a knowing look. I thought it was just urban legend nonsense. But standing here on this freezing platform, alone except for a delay notice flashing 11:50 p.m., Elmstead, delayed, I couldn't shake the unease creeping over me. A dead phone, a deserted station. And then, there was the man. I first noticed him at the far end of the platform, standing motionless under a broken light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a dark coat that seemed to swallow the light around him. His head was down, but I could feel his eyes, watching. The air felt colder. I told myself to keep calm, that I was just tired from a long day at work. Still, I stepped closer to the station entrance, away from him. But he didn't move, at least, not right away. The intercom crackled overhead, its distorted voice startling me. Attention, passengers, the 11:50 train to Elmstead is now approaching. Please stand clear of the tracks. The train's light emerged down the tracks, but the sound of its brakes was too loud, a metallic screech that made me flinch. When the doors slid open, they revealed a dim, flickering interior. I glanced back toward the man, but he was gone. My breath hitched. I spun around, searching the platform, but he had vanished into the shadows. Just get on the train, I muttered to myself. There was no other way home. The train doors closed behind me with a mechanical hiss. I sank into a seat near the door, the flickering lights casting strange, jittery shadows across the empty carriage. Or so I thought. A scraping sound drew my attention to the far end of the train. He was there, seated in the corner, partially hidden by shadows. My pulse quickened. It was the man from the platform. I tried not to look at him, but I couldn't stop myself. His head was slightly tilted, and though his face was obscured, I knew he was watching me. The train jerked forward, the clatter of wheels on tracks echoing through the carriage. Outside, the countryside blurred into black nothingness, but inside, the silence between us was louder than anything. I decided to move. Sitting near him felt wrong, unsafe. I stood, clutching my bag, and started walking toward the next carriage. "Where are you going, Mia?" I froze mid-step. My name. He had whispered it. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned back. He was still sitting, but his posture had changed. His shoulders were squared, his head tilted slightly to the side like he was amused. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He leaned forward slightly, and the flickering lights revealed his face. It was gaunt, his skin stretched tightly over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but his smile, the kind of smile that could split your soul, was what terrified me most. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice low, almost playful. The train suddenly screeched, throwing me off balance. The lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. And then, footsteps. I backed against the wall, clutching my bag as the footsteps grew louder, closer. "Stay away from me," I shouted into the blackness. The lights flickered back on, and he was standing directly in front of me, a knife glinting in his hand. "You shouldn't have gotten on this train," he said. I acted without thinking, swinging my bag at him and running for the door at the far end of the carriage. My hands fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't open. Behind me, his footsteps were slow and deliberate, like he was toying with me. "You know," he called out, his tone conversational. "I've ridden this train so many times. Most people don't even notice me. But you, Mia, you're different." I didn't wait to hear more. I darted into the next carriage, slamming the door behind me. This one was empty too, but the sense of being watched remained. The train slowed again, and when I glanced out the window, my stomach dropped. The view outside wasn't the countryside anymore. It was a sprawling void of black and red, filled with shifting, writhing shapes. The intercom buzzed overhead. Next stop, the end of the line. The train screeched to a halt. I turned to the door at the far end of the carriage, but before I could move, he was there. "You can't run, Mia," he said, stepping toward me. His knife gleamed in the dim light. I always get what I want. Something primal in me snapped. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it at him with all my strength. It connected with a sickening crack, and he collapsed. But the train didn't stop. The doors hissed open, revealing a platform unlike anything I'd ever seen. Cracked stone covered in shifting shadows. Faceless figures stood waiting, their heads tilting in unison as they turned toward me. "Come with us," they whispered in voices that seemed to echo inside my skull. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The man on the floor groaned, stirring, and I knew I couldn't stay. The figures on the platform began to move toward me, their steps slow and deliberate. Desperation took over. I ran to the far end of the carriage where a faint, warm light glowed. It felt like safety, like escape. I leapt into the light just as the faceless figures and the man lunged for me. I woke up on a bench, gasping for air. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. I was at the Elmstead station, surrounded by the sounds of morning life, birds chirping, distant chatter. My bag was on my lap, my coat torn and stained with something dark. I tried to tell myself it was a nightmare, but when I glanced at my hand, I saw a black mark burned into my skin, the outline of a knife. I don't know how I survived, but I know one thing. I'll never take the last train again.